everybody, today we're going to work on the October 2025 2-inch block project from the Perfectly Pieced subscription box. Perfectly Pieced is a subscription box from Me Time Delivered, which is a Kimberbell company. Information is linked below in the description box. Kimberbell did provide me with this box. Thank you so much, Kimberbell. Let's get started on our project. Included in your box are the single block with quilting instructions, and then in your digital library you get instructions for the block projects. I've printed off the 2-inch block project instructions and prepped all of my materials, and we're going to do one thing a little bit different. Let's go through everything. I have all my fabric and materials ready. Let me show you how I set this up, and let's go over what I'm going to do a little bit differently. This 2-inch block project has quilted blocks on the side and quilted borders on the top and the bottom, and then the centerpiece, which is only embroidery. I decided I wanted everything to be the same thickness, and I want to put batting behind this part here in the center. So I'm going to do background quilting first. I'm going to use 6x10 KDQ 2510 plant quilting, which is included in this month's subscription. So you will have this quilting. If you like the way this turns out, you can add that to the background of this block. Since I'll be adding background quilting, I cut an extra piece of batting, 7.5 by 13.5, to use for the quilting on this block. And we will go through step by step how to add that background quilting. Down here at the bottom, there's a nice little box here. It says piece and fabric. I went through and I cut everything. There's also a diagram. This illustrates the fabric numbers, which fabric goes where. I made little sticky notes, P for piece, F for fabric. This helps me stay organized. I also cut my fabric for the happiness block. This is on page 2 of the instructions. There's also little pictures showing you how to cut your fabric so you can get the most out of your fabric. I put fusible backing on the back of this fabric. It's got a texture to it, and it's a little bit more open feeling than the cottons. This is the only fabric I'm putting fusible on for this project. There's some cutting instructions here, and there's a note. Cut the border strips 1 to 2 inches longer if quilting them in the hoop. I not only cut mine longer, but I cut them wider. Sometimes when I do the Kimberbell quilted borders, the little fabric strip is really close to those fabric tack down lines. I know that this is the project I really want to make with this kit, and they also use this fabric for the backing, which I decided not to do. So that gives me extra fabric available to make my strips a little bit wider. It does tell you in the instructions to cut your borders 1.5 by 18.5. I cut mine 2.5 by 21. I've also cut my binding. For my backing, I went into my scrap drawer, and I have some of this. This was the cutoff from the bottom of a quilt, and then I pulled my threads. This thread comes with your Perfectly Pieced subscription box. The colors you need for the happiness block are on page 3 of the instructions. They give the colors as glide colors. So there's garnet, parsley, and Dijon. I have this glide color card. I purchased this from Linda's Electric Quilters. I'll go ahead and link them below, but you can probably get this at a local quilt shop. This helps me because I don't have a lot of glide. I actually have a lot of Floriani. What I'll do is look through here for the colors. Here's one we're using today called Garnet. And then I go to my thread wall and I try to find the closest match. So here's Garnet by Glide, and then this is my Floriani color. It's a really close match. That's going to look great. I also will hold it up next to the fabric and make sure it looks good. It looks really good with this fabric. The green they call for is Parsley. This one I didn't have a really exact match, but I have this color. It's a close match, and it looks good with the fabric in this month's kit. And the last color is Dijon. I picked this thread. Just in case it didn't focus very well, here's my thread numbers in case you have Floriani and you like the way my project turns out. On the back of the single block with quilting instructions, it shows this in a frame. My husband made me a frame out of pallet wood. You'll get to see that at the end. Some other things we're going to need today. We've got Kimberbell Ultralight or the Light Mesh Cutaway Stabilizer. I'm going to be using the Light Mesh Cutaway. We're going to be using that to make the quilt blocks. Medium Cutaway Stabilizer, that's going to be used for the embroidered happiness block. You need some project batting, fusible backing, which they do have marked as optional, paper tape, and a picture frame. And they give you the measurement for the picture frame. I'm I'm going to be using 2 hoops today. For the happiness block, I'll be making the 6 by 10 size. It also comes in a 5 by 7 size. You get instructions for both. The 5 by 7 is done in 2 parts. For the 6 by 10, I'll be using my 8 by 12 hoop. To make the 2-inch finished blocks, I actually pulled my big hoop. This is 9.5 by 14. Why in the world would you do that? We have to make 8 of them. I tried a couple of different configurations and I don't have all the hoop sizes for my machine. If I put them in this hoop, I can do 2, 4, 6, 8. Have enough space in between because we're going to be having tack downs and trimming, so you don't want them right on top of each other. So we're going to make all of them at once in this big giant hoop. Since these are 2-inch finished blocks, you may be able to fit 2 in a 5 by 7 hoop. I'm not sure, I didn't try that. But you can play with your machine and fit as many as you can into your hoop. But we'll work through them all in this big hoop. Since I've got the big hoop, I've got my big light mesh cutaway, the 20 by 10. I'm going to go ahead and load my stabilizer, hand tighten, screwdriver tighten, and we'll head over to the machine and we'll load our files. I'm on a Baby Lock Meridian. All my files are on USB. I've got my instructions here for the single block with quilting. Let's load our blocks. I'm going to load all 8 into one hooping. Here's the 2-inch block right there. To load multiple blocks, I'm going to hit edit. And there's a couple ways to duplicate the blocks. So I've talked about this before, but in case this is your first time watching, 2 ways you can duplicate your design. And if you have a Baby Lock or a Brother, you probably have the exact same buttons on your machine. The solid square and the dash square is called the duplicate key. The button underneath with the little squares is called the border key. I like to use the border key. The reason I like to use the border key is when I duplicate this, as we work through it, it will do the same thing over and over and over. So we're going to put 8 on the screen. So it'll go through all 8, step 1, step 2, step 3. If you use the duplicate key, it'll work completely through the first thing that you place, and then completely through the next one, and then the next one, and so on. So it depends how you like to work. I find it easier to do the same thing all at once. I need 8 of these. I'm going to use the border key. I'm going to move this up and over, and as I move this, if you watch, when it's in the center, you've got little hoops here on your screen. They're all lit up right now, but as I move it, now the littlest one is gone. That would be a 4 by 4. Now the 5 by 7 is gone, and now the square hoop is gone, and I'm off to my biggest hoop size. That lets me know I'm going to need my big hoop for that, but I want space between these. We're going to duplicate across first. So I hit this button. Here's the plus. There's 1. There's a button right here, space apart and space together. I want to space these apart because we're going to be trimming around these. I don't want to have to worry about getting in there really close with my hands and my scissors. Let's go ahead and move that up. Now we're going to duplicate down. That button right there. I've got 2, 4, 6, and 8. Make sure it's about in the center, and then I'm going to use this button here and space those apart. I'm taking advantage of all the space in my hoop to make this easy for me. If you put them closer together, you might be able to get them into a smaller hoop size. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to hit the memory button, save this to my machine. That way if something happens, it's on my machine. Embroidery. I'm going to change to the thread that was included with our kit. This is the Glide Warm Gray color. We're going to be using this color throughout. Let's start making our blocks. We're going to stitch out the batting placement line. My machine's going to stitch 8 of them. I've got 8 little squares and 8 little pieces of batting. We have to cover all of those placement lines. Since I'm stitching 8 at once, and the machine's going to be moving between each of these, I'm going to add a piece of tape, just in case. I've got all of these taped. We're going to stitch our batting tack down lines. Once you've got your batting tack down, you have to trim all the extra batting that's outside of that stitch line. I have all my little squares trimmed. The next thing we're going to stitch out is the piecing template. We have our piecing template stitched out. We're going to be starting with piece 1, fabric 1. I want to show you something. Here's our 2-inch block project instructions. Piece 1, fabric 1 on this is the green fabric. On your single block with quilting instructions, they have a different fabric in the center. The projects are made with the fabrics being placed in different locations, so be sure to be careful which fabric you're using. Make sure you've got the right fabric going in the right place for this project if you want it to look just like it looks in the picture. You want to get your piece 1, fabric 1, and we're going to place these over that center triangle. I actually went to stitch one out, and here's what I learned. Normally, when I place fabric on batting like this, I don't tape it. However, this line that it's going to stitch starts up here. So it goes like this, and what do you think happened? My presser foot kicked this up. I would recommend taping these because the way this is going to stitch out. Once all the trimming and placement lines have stitched, we'll need to remove the tape, and we need to trim everything over here on the left. These little tiny pieces, we want to go ahead and trim those off and get rid of that. Grab your piece 2, fabric 2, and we're going to place these right side down. It says to center it along that stitch line like that, and then we're going to stitch the seam. I'm going to lay them all down without tape, and we'll see where these start. These are all stitched, but look at this one. I did not do a good job centering that. That's way over the line. When I fold it, it actually goes beyond this outside line. That's where I need it to be. Here's the outside stitch line. There's the outside of my fabric. So it's fine. I don't have to fix it. I wasn't paying attention. Make sure you're paying attention. I'm going to take this to my ironing board. Normally I just finger press these, but these are tiny pieces. So I plugged in my little mini iron. I'm going to take my hoop off my machine and go over to my ironing board and press everything. Everything's pressed. When you're ironing, be careful with your batting, especially if it's 80-20. You don't want to melt your batting. Next, we're going to stitch another trimming and placement line that's going to run along the bottom. Well, that's a big giant mess. I'm gonna have to clean that up. Tape the rest of these before I go any further. Since it's stitching this way, I don't need that happening again. And then I can go back and fix this. All fixed. That took some doing. Remember at the beginning when I saved this to memory? I'm glad I did that, because once I got this cleaned up and put it back on my machine, it was not in the correct spot. Even though nothing had changed inside of my hoop, I hadn't bumped my machine or anything, it was just off because it got caught and the machine was tugging on it and probably thinking it was in a certain spot, but it wasn't in that spot. I ended up powering down my machine, turning it back on, and bringing this up from memory. We're ready to go ahead and continue stitching these lines here, and I put tape all along the edge of the green fabrics. Once all of these lines have stitched, we want to trim away any extra. I removed all the tape, and now we need piece 3, fabric 2. Same fabric we just used, piece 3, it's a different size. We want to take these and center them along that line that just stitched, and I'm going to go ahead and add a piece of tape at the top. I have all my pieces placed, double checking, make sure they're right sides down, tape to make them secure, and then we're going to stitch the seam. All the little seams are stitched. I'm going to take off all the tape, go to my iron, and get everything pressed. These are all pressed. It's going to stitch another trimming and placement line. Looks like it's going to go this way. I'm going to hand crank my needle down. It's within the fabric. I was making sure it wasn't past the edge. I'm going to try doing this without taping. If I need to tape as I go, I'll stop it. These all stitched out just fine. Here's that block where I was a little short. Look at that, it's right there on the edge. You're going to want to trim away all of this that's on the outside of that trimming and placement line. We're on piece 4, fabric 7. Now what's interesting is when I trimmed this, I made sure to trim it really, really straight. It's on the diagonal, it's not even going to matter because we're going to put this like this, and then we're going to flip it, and it's going to be crooked. Or I guess you could say it's on point. So if you want your square straight, you need to be careful how you trim it. You want to center this along that line just like before, and then we're going to stitch the seam. I'm going to tape all of these. They're all right sides together, double check. Everything's taped in the upper corner. We're going to stitch the seam. Those all stitched out just fine. We want to take our tape off of everything, go to the ironing board, flip it, and press. These are all flipped and pressed. One thing I notice is that bottom corner is going right inside just the littlest bit inside the next line for the next block underneath it. I'm going to go ahead and cut the bottom corners off of these so they don't get stuck in the next block. Here's what that looks like. You may not have to do that if you have more space between and you don't have to worry about it on the bottom. Let's put this back on our machine. The next line it's going to stitch is going to go this way. That's going to create this center triangle here. Do you see where my needle is? I'm outside this piece of fabric. I'm not going to test my luck anymore today. I'm taping these. All taped. Here we go. I'm going to remove my tape, and we want to trim this little bit, and this little bit. Grab piece 5, fabric 3. This is going to go centered along those lines just like before. So laying it down like that, centering it along those lines, and then it's going to stitch a seam. I have all my fabric placed and taped. Let's stitch our seam. Seams are stitched. I'm going to take the tape off, flip them, and press them. And if any part like this top corner here is kind of encroaching on this block, I want to trim that off because we've got one more fabric to place, and then we're going to be doing all over quilting on these. So you don't want to get a little piece of this stuck onto this block. These are all pressed and trimmed. You'll want to remove your tape if you used any, and then trim whatever is on this side of this stitch line. So get rid of that bit on each of the blocks. We're on piece 6, fabric 4. Same thing we've been doing. You'll want to place that centered along that seam line, and then we're going to stitch the seam. These are placed and taped. Let's stitch the seam. All the seams are stitched. You'll do the same thing we've been doing. Remove the tape, flip it, press it, cut anything that runs into another block. Now is also a good time to check your bobbin, because once we have these pressed, we're going to stitch an outside trimming line, and then we're going to do the quilting. You don't want your bobbin to run out in the middle of the quilting. I've got everything pressed, trimmed, and I went ahead and added a little piece of tape. We're going to stitch the trimming line. All of my trimming lines have stitched out. One thing I noticed on all of my blocks, gosh, except for 1 or 2, I'm really tight on the corners here. Do you see how close this is? It's right on the edge, especially this red fabric. Right here, and right here it's a little short. I'm not worried about it because we're going to be sewing these together and stitching them in a project. So I know I'm going to lose 1/4 of an inch and 1/4 of an inch. So it will take care of that. Let's quilt our blocks. I can't believe I forgot to record all the quilting. These all came out just fine. I'm going to get this off my machine. We need to trim these blocks. Got all my blocks here. I've already cut off some of the extra stabilizer. I saved this and reused that. You'll see how in a bit. The first thing I want to do is just separate all of these. These have a nice trimming line on the outside. They cut to 2.5 inches square. A couple ways you can do that. If you've got the little 2.5 inch square ruler, you can use that. But one thing I've found with the quilted blocks is it kind of bumps because you've got fabric, batting, the stabilizer. So I find it hard to make this lay flat. Actually, I like to use another ruler. This happens to be a 5 inch square ruler. I like to cut 2 sides at a time. I'll line up this side, and we're going to cut right on that line, but you can also measure. I've got a 2.5 and a 2.5, and that is right on the line. This one is done. I'm going to set it aside and cut the rest. These are all trimmed. For the project we're working on, the 2 inch block project, The yellow is going to go in the center. You can turn them all, put the yellow in the center. You can start to see what this is going to look like. And we're going to have one section on one end and one section on another end. So it's 4 blocks in each little section. That's what these are going to look like. We need to sew these together. We're going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. One thing to think about is even when we're trimming right on that trim line, they're probably not perfectly straight. I know mine aren't. We want to try and get these yellow points to match. So they're going to go right sides together. I'm going to take that to my sewing machine. You want that intersection to match. I've got some clips right here. A pin would probably be better, but the pin is over by the machine. So I'm just going to clip that. I'm going to sew along that line. And then this one as well, right sides together. Make sure your yellow is lining up. Pin it or clip it. 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'll go sew these and we'll see how they turn out. I've got these sewn. Let's get a close-up look. Pretty darn close. This one could go that direction a little bit, but honestly, when it's in the project and on the wall, to me, that's not going to bother me. This one I did twice because it was way off. It's much better like this. I'll try something 3 times. If on the 3rd time things still aren't lining up, honestly, I just give up. You can see here, this one that's a little crooked. This intersection here is also a little crooked. This doesn't bother me. It's very minute, and when it's done, you're not going to see it when it's framed. I'm going to press these so they nest. This one I'll press this way. This one I'll press this way. So I'm going to press one up and one down. Then when I go to sew them together, the seams will slide together and they'll lock, which will give me a better chance of getting this to line up here and this to line up here. There's a lot of lining up. You have to decide how precise you feel like you need to be with these. Let's sew this one and see how that turns out. I sewed it together. I pressed the seam open because there's a lot of bulk. Let's see how I did. Not perfect, but not bad. This to me is just fine. Everything matches right here. That looks great. This looks great. This is slightly off. That's slightly off. If you go in really close, you can see it's not perfect. But when this is in the finished project, again, nobody is going to notice it. I'm going to sew the next one. We'll see how that one turns out. Here's the second block. Again, not perfect. It's not going to bother me. Let's set these aside. We're going to work on our borders. Everybody, a quick note before you start working on your borders. Please check the border file measurements. You'll see here I'm working with the 1x10, but it's actually showing as 1x8. This causes a problem at the end. I will work around it, so you'll get to see what I do, but double check the measurements on your file so you don't have to go back and correct anything. Send a message to Kimberbell's customer service to let them know. I haven't heard back yet as of the editing of this video, but I know it will be addressed. They're great with their customer service. My border strips I cut 2.5 by 21 because I'm doing the quilting, and I want to try them a little bit wider and see if that helps with the tack down. You can cut your batting a couple of different ways. You just need to make sure it's wider than your strip. You can use scrap batting. Since I'm going to do 2 at once in one hoop, I have a couple odd sized pieces. You can see if your border strips will fit. That's fine. I'm going to measure the length of this. I'm going to be working with the 10-inch long file. Look, that's 11 inches. That's perfect. I'm going to cut myself another piece like that. I'm going to quilt half and then rehoop and quilt the second half. If you don't mind having a seam in your border, you can do 10-inch strips for this and line up 4 and do 4 and then stitch them together to make the 2 larger borders. You can get it all done in one hooping. I'm going to use my 8x12 hoop for the borders. I don't need that big long hoop. And if you've watched some of my videos before, you've seen me save my cutoff stabilizers. This is a great use for this. This piece is big enough, but it wasn't wide enough for my hoop, so I sewed a couple strips on either side. That'll let me hoop it in this hoop. I'll put this in, hand tighten, screwdriver tighten, and we'll head over to the machine. We're back at the machine. We need to bring up the border file. I cut my strips wider to help with the tack down. We need the 1-inch wide border, and I'm doing the 1x10. Our final project is 18 inches across the top and the bottom. That's where our border is going to run. Using 2 of the 10-inch long files will give me 20 inches, so we'll trim a little bit off on either end, which is fine. I'm going to set that, and I need 1 more. I'm going to use that border duplicate button again. I need to border it on the side. I'm going to go ahead and add one. I'm going to stretch it out a little bit. That looks centered. I'm going to hit OK. Save it to my machine just in case. I'm quilting these with the same color thread, the one that came in the box. The first thing that's going to stitch out is the batting placement line, and it's going to stitch 2. You want to cover this with your batting. I cut that big piece so I can just work with 1 piece. I have more than enough. In fact, I have enough to, instead of centering it, I'm going to slide it over a little bit, and I'll still have some that I can cut off and reuse for another project. Make sure you've completely covered your placement lines, then you're going to stitch the tack down. You need to trim everything that's outside of the tack down lines. These are trimmed. We want to stitch our fabric placement lines. Let's have a look at these. The instructions have you cutting your border fabric 1.5 inches wide. I'm going to show you why I cut mine bigger. Here's the fabric placement line, right there. Here's the fabric placement line. It's exactly 1.5 inches. So if you've cut your fabric strips 1.5 inches wide, it's going to fit, but it's going to be an exact fit. I don't like having to deal with that exact fit. I find that kind of difficult. That's why I cut my strips wider. My strips are 2.5 inches. I can lay my strips down like that. You want to cover that fabric tack down line. And I've cut these longer. I've cut these 21 inches, so I've got some room, some wiggle room here. I'm going to go past that top line, tape it, and I'm going to double check this one, make sure I'm past the top line, add my tape, and then I want to smooth these down, and I'm going to add some tape down here. You can see that these end right here. So I can add tape below to hold everything and it won't be a problem. The next thing that's going to stitch out is the fabric tack down line. These are all tacked down. You can see I've got plenty of extra fabric. So if you don't want to cut 2.5 inch strips, if you cut a 2 inch strip, that'll still give you some space on either side. What this did though for this particular fabric is it gave me the opportunity to move it so I could have this running down the center of both my border strips. This kit in particular is a good kit to cut these bigger because if you use something else for the backing, you haven't really used up any of your extra fabric. Now we're going to stitch our quilting. The first part of our border is stitched. We're over at the table. We want to go ahead and get this out of the hoop. I'm going to cut away this nice big fat piece of excess stabilizer on the top. This can probably be used yet again. That's a good size for something small. And the same thing for these strips on the side. I can probably use these again. We want to go ahead and separate our strips. You want to get rid of this excess stabilizer. You can use scissors if you want. Don't cut your threads. I'm just going to be really careful. And then I've got some extra stabilizer here I can get rid of. I'll go ahead and get that out of the way. You want to make sure that this is cut nice and close, but don't cut your fabric. Go ahead and set these aside for a minute. You need to rehoop another piece of stabilizer. We're going to take this over to our machine and we're going to do our batting placement lines, place our batting, do the batting tack down, trim the excess batting, and then stitch the fabric placement line. Then we're going to bring that back up here. So the first few steps just like before. We are back over at the table. You need your border strips that you've got half quilted. I've got the quilted part up here and the unquilted part down here. We're going to fold this. Here's the back of the quilted part. You've got all those little nice lines of stitching to help you line this up. What you want to try to do is line up all the lines of stitching. So both sides have fabric placement. You can see the fabric placement. You can see the batting lines. You can see the top line here, the side lines. What I like to do is roll it up a little bit. You've got your batting lines. They're very helpful. I can see the thread on that. And then slide it up a little bit, keeping it centered and sliding it. And then you want to try and match up that top line of stitching. I'm double checking, making sure These lines on the side are matched. And we're going to scooch that up. And I will tell you, if you don't get this exactly right, it's fine. I've done these where they're like a thread or two off. You really can't tell. They always turn out great. I'm going to tape that, hold that in place, and then I'm going to double check. Roll it up, roll it down, looking at all my little thread lines. That matches. I'm going to add some more tape. I'm happy with the way that's placed up here. I want to smooth it to the bottom, and I want to tape the bottom to hold it in place. This one's ready to go. We're going to do the same process over here. Everything is taped. We want to take this back over to our embroidery machine. We're back at the machine. I've got my hoop on. I'm going to go in as close as I can. One thing you can do if this is your first time doing the borders and you want to double check, you can see your fabric tack down line from before. I'm going to hand crank my needle down. I've got a loose thread there. Okay, if I want to be ultra super crazy picky, this can probably go that way about a millimeter. No joke. That needle is almost exactly on that stitch line. I'm not messing with it. I'm happy with that. I'm going to go ahead and stitch the fabric tack downs. And after the fabric tack down stitch, you can also double check them at the top. And if you find that you're way off, the fabric tack down lines are a longer stitch. They're really easy to pull out. Our fabric tack down lines have stitched. Let's get in really close and see how well I did matching them. Here's the one on the left. You can see where the quilting ends and where the top tack down line ends and the lower one starts. Looks like I'm a little bit shifted by about a thread. I'm fine with that. You're never going to see it. This one here on the right, wow, spot on. Good job on that one. Let's do the quilting for our 2 border strips. Back at the cutting table, remove all of your tape and get your strips out of the hoop. You want to cut away the extra stabilizer and then separate your strips. We're going to trim these to 1.5 inches. So if you cut your fabric exact, they're pretty much ready to go. What I'm going to look at is on the back. Had a little audio glitch. If you measure the 2 outside lines on the back, they're exactly 1.5 inches wide. When you flip it to the front, you'll see 2 different lines on the outside. They're not 1.5 inches wide. They're actually about 1.25 inches wide. So keep that in mind if you're using the stitch lines to cut your strips. If you're cutting from the front, you need to add 1/4 inch outside of each of the outside stitch lines. You want your strip to be 1.5 inches wide. That gives you 1/4 inch seam allowance on each side, 1/4 inch to attach to your project, and 1/4 inch for your binding. Be careful with your measurements and go ahead and cut your strips top to bottom so they end up at 1.5 inches wide. Next, we're going to stitch the happiness block. I'm stitching the 6x10 version. There is a 5x7 version, so if all you have is a 5x7 hoop, you can stitch it in 2 parts. It's in the instructions. I'm using an 8x12 hoop for this, and I'm adding background quilting. I talked about this in the beginning. So I'll step you through this with the added background quilting. And I cut myself an extra piece of batting, and for this fabric I did add the fusible. Let's head over to the machine. I'm going to step you through loading this file with the additional background quilting. We want to load that background quilting first. I'm using the 6x10 file because that's going to fit with the 6x10 embroidery. That's ready to go. We're going to hit add, and we're going to add our embroidery file. And that's all set to go. For this part of the project, I'm going to go ahead and leave the thread on that came with the box. So we're going to start with our batting placement line. I'm going to place my batting. I'll stitch the tack down and then I'll trim everything that's outside of that line. I'm going to stitch my fabric placement line. Put my fabric down over that fabric placement line. Make sure that I've got that completely covered. It's almost an exact fit. That came out just fine. You probably saw my hands. I really shouldn't do that. Don't ever get your hands really close to this while it's stitching. This will stitch right through your finger. It did catch on the edges, so it's nice and tacked down. I'm going to stitch the quilting. This is all quilted. Look at it. It looks beautiful. I'm really glad I added the background quilting to that. It gives it a nice additional detail, a little bit more texture. If you're using glide thread, the color is garnet. This is the color I'll be using today. We're going to stitch out the words happiness and heart. Those two words have stitched out. You want to switch to the green, which is parsley. If you're using glide, this is the color that I'm using today. We're almost done. We just have the little leaves over there. If you're using the glide, the color is Dijon. This is the color I'll be using today. This is all stitched. I've got a jump thread right here and here and a little loose thread right there. I'm going to trim those off. Up, and one more jump thread right here. I'm going to make sure those are all trimmed, and then we'll go over to the cutting board and we'll trim this block. Here's my block. It's stitched out beautifully. Let me bring it up close. You can see some of the edges. They're not perfectly straight, but that has more to do with the weave of this fabric. It's almost like a woven. Can you hear that? It has a texture to it. It looks great. No problem using the light mesh instead of the medium stabilizer in the background, and I think that's because I did the batting and the background quilting. I'm really glad I did the background quilting for that. Have a look at that. I think it adds a little something extra. Just gives it a little bit of a special touch. Let's go ahead and trim this. The instructions here have us using the orange pop rulers. I've done trimming with the orange pop rulers in several of my videos. Rather than use the orange pop rulers, I'm going to use regular rulers today. Our block needs to trim to 10.5 by 4.5. I've got a square ruler. It's 12.5 inches. And what I notice is we've got our stitch line here and here from my quilting. When I line this up to measure on that line, and then on this line, it's almost exactly 10.5. Let me move this over. It is 10.5. So this line here to this line here is 10.5 inches. Let me grab a regular ruler. I'm just going to cut right next to those stitches. I'm not going to cut on the stitches. I'm afraid this fabric might fray a little bit, so I'm going to cut a little bit past. Let's measure this. I'm going to grab this ruler. It shows up better on camera. Should be 10.5 inches. I'm just a hair over 10.5, but that's because I cut right outside those stitches. So I'm going to take a little bit off either end. 10.5. This piece I believe is 6.5. That was the cut size from the beginning. It's slightly over 6.5. Just the itty bitty bittiest. I need this to be 4.5. I need to take an inch off each side. I'm going to line it up this way. This is straight, so I'm going to line up this part of my ruler along that part to make sure I keep it straight. 1 inch. I need to cut an inch off either side. If you want to double check before you cut anything, I've got another ruler here. Here's an inch. I'm going to lay that down. 1 inch. And then I have a 4.5 inch square ruler. Let me grab that. 4.5 inches square. Fits right there. There's a little bit of room for movement. Remember I said it was a little bit bigger than 6.5? There. I brought it in just a hair. Make sure that's straight. Let's make sure that's straight. That actually worked really good. We're going to cut here and here. Sort of like making my own little orange pop ruler because I can cut on the inside. I'm going to cut that side and this side. Let's cut this. Since I already have a ruler there, and I know it's where I want it to be, I'm going to hold it, bump this ruler against it, take this ruler away, and then I can cut this. Ta-da! 4.5. Let's lay our pieces out for assembly. We've got our center embroidered piece and our 2 blocks. This is where we want to start. I'm going to put these right sides together. I'm going to stitch with the seams like that. 1/4 inch seam, 1/4 inch seam. I sewed them together, press them open. Here's how it looks from the front. Next we want to get our borders. Here I am trimming my borders to the edge of the quilting. I should have had a clue by how much fabric I was cutting off. You can see that it's going to be too short. Oh dear, what did I do wrong? I'm flipping through all the instructions, double checking my measurements, trying to figure out what in the world happened. I'm going to put my borders down. That is way, way too short. I thought, did I copy over the wrong file? What did I do wrong? Let's go over to the embroidery machine. Here's the file I copied straight from my library from the download. 1x10 border. Do you see that? 1.5, 8.03. This is not by 10 inches. This is 8 inches. Now I'm short for my border. Let's talk about what we can do. So here's what I have. I've got 2 borders that are short. Let's see how short they are. Just about 3 inches short. I've got that file loaded on my machine. What I'm going to do is cut one more strip, and I'm going to use that to fill in the gap. And I'll attach it, and then when I sew this on, I'll just sew it on like that. There'll be a little seam and a little seam in my border. It's not going to bother me. The thing I'll try to be careful about is I've made a big deal about centering this, trying to get that in the center of my border. I'll try to do the same thing. So when I add on that little extra piece, it will look continuous. Here's my extra piece. I did pretty good. I'll be able to line that up. I did really good. Look at that. You are not going to see it. If you get right in front of it, you will see how the quilting doesn't quite line up, and I do need to press that. But otherwise, when this is in the frame, do you see the lines continuous? All the grids look good. You're not even going to see it. Don't even worry about it if this happened to you. If you got yours before you had a chance to see what happened, no reason to worry about it. Let's get our borders and our project. Now I have plenty. I can resume finishing my project. We want to attach our borders. You can pin or clip, sew them on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then you'll want to press them either out or open. Here's the back. I went ahead and pressed open. Let's look at the front. You can see my borders are long. I just need to trim that and even that up, and then we'll go to the next step. I'm going to grab a ruler. I'm going to line it up along with the block and along with the seam here to make sure that I trim these straight. Looks like my block might be a little crooked. No shocker there. We'll go ahead and get all that straightened out. Yep, just a little bit. And let's do the other side. Same thing. Grab one of your seams, line it up with your seam, line it up with the edge of your project, and then trim off the extra. This is all trimmed. Let's talk about 2 options for finishing. Now, I did cut backing and binding for this. This is when you would put this on top of your backing, and you would do stitch in the ditch to attach, which is stitching inside the seams, and then trim any extra backing and do binding. I've done that in a couple of different videos. I'll make sure to link something below if you want to watch that process. I'm putting this in a frame. It's not going to come out of the frame, and I should have thought of this before I cut backing and binding, but it's not a big deal. Here's my finished project. Let me grab my frame. It's a big frame. This is the frame my husband made for me out of pallet wood. We have a couple pallets on the side of our yard. I think some of them have been there for several years. Sanded it, sealed it, and the corners are a little bit crooked because the wood is warped. This has been sitting out in our yard for years, so it's a little bit crooked. And I told him that that was perfect because chances are my project was going to be a little bit crooked. He cut the opening 6 by 18. Let's slide our project underneath. Right now, it doesn't have the binding, it doesn't have the backing, but look at that. It's going to fit because he cut the opening just right. For this project, I'm going to frame it. It's going to stay in the frame. It's not coming out of the frame. I'm not going to add the backing and binding, and instead, I'm going to show you how to frame something. This frame is a little bit unique. When you buy a regular frame, on the back, it'll have some of those little tabs that help hold the backing. This doesn't have it, but he did create the inset for me. Can you see that? So it's got that nice inset. What I want to do is measure this inset. It's 6 3/4, and I'm going to measure another spot, a couple spots, because I know it's a little crooked. It's 6 3/4. Let me write that down. We have 6 3/4, and then we need to measure from here to here. I'm going to need a larger ruler, and again, if you bought a prefab frame, you'll have a piece of cardboard that's appropriately sized. You won't have to do this. This is a little bit unique. It's just under 19, so I'm going to go with 18 3/4. Those are the measurements that I need to frame my piece, 18 3/4. Let me set the frame aside and I'll show you how we're going to finish this. This is sideways because it won't fit the other way because of the tripod. This is called self-stick mounting board. Sticky board, if you're a cross stitcher, you're very familiar with this. I have a piece that's 16 by 20. I like to keep the big pieces on hand for larger things that I work with and because I can cut it down. What I need to do is cut myself a piece 18 3/4 by 6 3/4. I'll show you what this looks like if you've never worked with it before, and you're going to want to use either a rotary cutter or a pair of scissors that you're not fond of and that you don't care if it gets sticky. This side is plain. When you turn it over, it has this backing. It says press on. This will peel off and there's sticky underneath it. I need to measure 6 3/4 by 18 3/4. I'm going to get my big ruler. This ruler is 8.5 inches wide. I want 6 3/4. Here's the 6, 6.5, 6 3/4. That's where I'm going to start. I'm going to measure myself a 6 3/4 piece, and then I need 18 3/4. Since this is only 20, I'm not concerned with saving that little bit. I have a rotary cutter, you can probably tell that it's dirty, that I use for cutting sticky board. I will tell you this is a little difficult to cut through. It's a bit like thick cardboard. Let's go ahead and cut this. And then I'm going to cut again because I know I didn't get all the way through. That should be all the way through. Nope. Let's see. There we go. I'm going to save that, and I'll put a link to where you can find this. I get mine at Fat Quarter Shop, but you can get, if not this brand, similar brands at craft stores. You don't have to buy this brand. I'm just familiar with this brand. This is what I've been using for a while for my cross stitch products. There are plenty of types of sticky board. 18, and that's 18 3/4. I'm going to cut it just a bit larger just in case. It's the back of my frame. It's just a hair too long. I need to cut a little bit off. I should have cut it right on that 3/4 line. Let me trim a little more off. Let's see if that fits. And that does fit. What I'm going to do is tape this in place. I want to flip this to the front and make some markings. Here it is from the front. Pencil. Here's my markings. I just want to make sure that it's going to fit. So when you look at this board and you look at the piece, do you see that? The board is slightly bigger than the piece. Now we're going to peel this up and it's going to expose the sticky part. This is almost the hardest part, is getting this paper up. Sometimes you have to get a stiletto or something. Before I completely peel this away, I'm going to look at my marking on this side. Mark it there. Mark it here. I'm going to look at my other mark. It's kind of hard to do with the camera. This is going to help me center my piece. Okay, I'm going to do the other corner. You can also just peel, stick, and hope for the best, which I do that on occasion. Mark that. This is going up this direction. Okay, then I can see it for the front. If you peel the paper off and then put your ruler down to do this, your ruler is going to get stuck to the sticky board. You don't want to do that. Now I've got marks in all the corners. This is sticky, see? peel that off. And if you place it crooked, you can peel it, stick it, peel it, stick it. It's not like super glue. I'll go ahead and I'll start with this edge. I can see my little marks here, there. Okay, I don't have that quite, I can tell right away I don't have it quite centered. What I'm going to do is place that and just touch this. I'm going to bring it across. I can tell it's not straight. Something else you can do as you're placing your project. Now I can move it around a little easier. It's really hard to do going around the tripod. That's better. Now I can work with both ends. Let me place that and see how that looks. And then I'm going to place this side. In fact, if you want to quilt it and bind it but mount it with the sticky board, you can leave that piece right there in the center and just stick down the outside. Looks pretty straight. Let's grab our frame. A lot of this for me is just trial and error. I know there are people who professionally frame and would probably cringe at the way I do things, but that's okay. Works for me. Let's line this up. I'm going to flip it over. It looks good. I do need to peel the paper because I want to stick this down, but it looks nice and centered. I'm just going to carefully roll it that way. Get rid of this paper. Roll it back. Just keep an eye on it. Make sure you're, centering it. Making sure it looks really straight. Might have to hold those seams open. Before I give it a final press, let's put it inside the frame again. That looks good. Remember, this is a fabric product. Fabric doesn't lie 100% flat, 100% straight, unless you're using foundation paper and you are a super, I don't know what you want to call it, the queen of accurate quilting. Seams aren't always straight. Things can sometimes be crooked. I can see this is a little bit crooked right here, just a bit. There we go. See, you can peel and stick. Now, if I decide a year from now, I want to take this off the sticky board and add the backing and add the binding, I can. I've done that before with cross stitch projects. I've peeled it off. I've done something else with it. This looks like it's ready to go. Let's put this in the frame. And here comes another DIY. My husband made this for me really quick. You can see there's nothing to attach it. I'm going to use tape. Don't laugh. This is completely DIY. I suppose you could use duct tape if you want, but I'm going to use painter's tape because if I want to take it apart later, I can. I'll go ahead and mute the sound when I pull the tape because it's really loud. Just stick on a piece of tape. I have a very big cross stitch that I did this with probably a year and a half ago. It's still sticking with the tape. It works fine. That's stuck on there really well. If my husband had time, he would have added some little nails or brads or something for me. Before I flip this to the front, I'm actually going to write my name, where I live, the date that I finished the project, and what the project is. Since I'm not adding a quilt label, I'll have a record of it on the back. We are all done. Isn't that beautiful? The big, beautiful frame of recycled wood. Are the blocks perfect? No. Where's the line for the borders? Here's one here. And see, that's really hard to see. I did a great job matching that up. I can't wait to hang this up. This is absolutely beautiful. I'm going to put this on the floor so we can see the whole entire thing in the frame. There you go. You can see the whole thing. It's on wood flooring, so wood frame on wood flooring. A little hard to see. It came out great. I couldn't be more pleased with it. Even though we had a little bit of trouble along the way, What a fun project. I can't wait to hang this up. Thank you so much for joining me for the October 2025 Perfectly Pieced 2-inch block project. I hope you enjoyed watching this. I hope you enjoyed seeing everything that went wrong, what I did to work around it, and a different way to finish off your project. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share. Leave any comments in the comments box below. If there's anything in particular you'd like to see on my channel, please let me know. I'll be back soon with more Kimberbell and me time projects. See you next time!